Hey folks, you're listening to the Writers Podcraft, where my co-host and I examine popular media and articulate our thoughts about why the story works or doesn't. My name's Colin, and I'm joined by my co-host Lance. Lance, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Daredevil Born Again, Episode 3, The Hollow of His Hand. So here's a brief recap. There's infighting between the New York gangs, which is related back to Wilson Fisk. Nikki Torres, the victim of the police, was a confidential informant for the officers and is Matt's main witness. Nikki lies under oath, and then Matt is forced to reveal that Hector Ayala is the White Tiger. His appeal to pathos works, and Hector is found not guilty. The anti-vigilante Fisk doesn't like this, and a Punisher wannabe kills White Tiger. So what do you think of this episode?
I thought, honestly, I really was digging it for the first 20 or so minutes. I thought the show's pacing was much better and more interesting ideas are being explored. To go in a tad bit more detail, the first half of the episode, we saw that Matt's associates were bringing Nikki over to testify against the police, Powell and Shanahan, who died on Metro Station, and the police said that it was due to the White Tiger. Also, there's a confrontation in the bathroom where Powell confronts Matt, and it's kind of like, I know you have abilities that you are not saying you have. Like, I know there's something, he doesn't call him Daredevil, and I don't think he knows he's Daredevil, but he clearly knows that something is up with Matt, and he reminds him, like, I know that about you. And it was just interesting to see the conflict and the tension like escalate just incrementally so, which is where I thought episode two was ending off. And it was nice to see that get further developments. Um, but I thought that the court trial was actually pretty tame. How about you?
I overall enjoyed the episode. I did enjoy the Hector Ayala reveal, but I can get to that later. Do you have any specific analysis you want to start into?
Yeah, I think that there's it's a little bit hard to keep up with certain things about the court trial, which is like Nikki. Well, what was his role with the police? They say that he's a confidential informant, and the police officers are obviously crooked, and they are roughing him up on the metro station. Nikki obviously lies, presumably because he's afraid of the police, right? Doesn't
Mhm.
want retaliation for testifying against them. But what did the police actually want with Nikki? Like, why were they roughing him up? Presumably for no good reason, but like we still really don't know what kickstarted this entire event. So I was like, I feel like this is sort of like a basic answer you should explain since it's like it's a catalyst for the entire arc. So that lack of explanation was a little bit weird, and I just kept thinking, oh, it's gonna come eventually, and it doesn't. What I thought was kind of weird about the resolution about this episode, or about the court case, is that Matt's legal strategy is just like, let's throw caution to the wind. Let's just announce that Hector is the White Tiger and use his reputation for being a hero as his defense now that Nikki's lying, and we cannot use that as like a legitimate defense anymore. I didn't really enjoy that so much because I felt like there should be a healthy bit of good legalese, a good lawyering, and then also good writing. And this
What
didn't
would you
feel
have
like it was
used?
a very good legal strategy.
What would you have wanted him
I
to
don't
do?
know. I think there should have been something in the beginning that's more interesting that Matt can use. Like ultimately, if he uses this legal strategy, I guess that's fine. But it was just kind of unsatisfying seeing Matt not use a clever legal strategy to kind of outthink his way through this. He just uses a kind of a blunt idea. And I think legal dramas really succeed when they're hyper tailored to the legal world, right? And then they use clever writing tactics to kind of like flesh out the story. But this was such a blunt and undelicate way of resolving the conflict. I was like, I don't know about this.
Do you have any specific examples of like specific legal techniques that were used in previous Daredevil seasons?
I think that um, in season two of the Punisher arc, there's a little bit of, well, I won't say a little bit. There's a thorough bit of research as Karen and Foggy, and not so Matt, not a lot of Matt, because Matt was doing the Electro arc at the time, but Foggy and Karen were really learning more, peeling back the layers to the Punisher, like learning what happened at Central Park. They were talking to like investigators, looking at the archives of news clippings. They would meet with the Punisher and talk to him about like different legal strategies. Like they were talking about PTSD at one point, and Punisher was like, "No, I do not want to use PTSD." They found another thing that was like PTSD but was different, right? So another legal strategy. It was not just like throwing a Hail Mary, It was not a blunt alternative. they use like another more delicate and harder to kind of ascertain legal strategy to kind of circumvent Punisher's own limitations. And I feel like we lacked that really specific legal strategy here in this episode. Like this was just really throwing caution to the wind, undelicate, really blunt, not really super. I mean, it's clever in so much that it works, but I did not feel like this was the super what a genius moment by Matt. I did not feel like like super impressed by his like legal expertise with that strategy. I was like, okay. I mean, if you say so.
So, I mean, I didn't really consider what you were saying, but as you were talking about, I mean, I didn't consider this a problem, but as you were talking about it, two thoughts came to mind. The first issue is that maybe part of the problem is that this was only one episode. The entire court case was basically wrapped up just immediately. And then the second problem is that we don't have enough details about the story to even go into the level of detail. For example, with Frank's case, there were multiple episodes building up. There are at least like three, I believe, before he got put in jail, where he was killing a bunch of people. And then we also learn about his rich backstory and all of that little details and all that stuff. In this story, we get one scene of Hector stopping a fight and the dude dying. And then we have a whole court case built off of that. But we don't get any other scenes. We don't know, as you said, we don't know why they were attacking this dude. We don't know why Nikki was used as a confidential informant. There are not enough details for the story to even flesh out the characters doing research and coming up with a clever tactic. And then on top of that, all of it's condensed down into one episode. So we kind of got to rush through it and like just quickly come up with a solution. We don't have multiple times where they do try an attempt to do something, but then they're met with an obstacle. So then they have to come up with another solution. Then they're met with an obstacle, kind of like they were doing in season two, I believe. So, I mean, that just kind of leads into a bigger problem that I had with the story. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I think you really summed it up very well because like I remember when episode two ended, I actually really enjoyed the ending. I thought that we're reaching a point of no return. Matt just like beat up a bunch of crooked cops. So, like, okay, the conflict is escalating, stuff's about to go down. And stuff does go down admittedly in episode three, but I felt I was under a strong impression that after episode two, I was like, okay, there's gonna be at least two, if not three, if not four more episodes of the White Tiger arc. We're just getting started. And then it ends right after that, basically in the next episode. I was like, oh wow, that was really a lot. You could have really mined this for more interesting drama. Like imagine if there was like more back and forth with the court documents, like they're trying to interview sources and people don't want to be found or they don't want to say the truth. Like the Nikki thing was like pretty when he starts lying, that was a pretty
Mm,
good kind of like, okay, it's a loss, now we got bounced back from. But I was hoping for like back and forth, back and forth. We think we're winning, we start to lose, we start losing, we start to win. It's more like back and forth conflict. It was just like, okay, one loss, and then one win, and it's over.
mm,
I thought that was just like, oh, we could have really fleshed out this White Tiger arc much more, it made the story much more interesting than a simple, it's almost a one and done. I know it starts in
mm,
episode two, but like the way that it's like resolved so quickly in three, and there's still some plot beats out there, like we don't know the confidential informant, like what was his operation? Like I would presume that he was doing something that is mysterious and that will be explored more down the line. But now I can't tell. Was it just like a matter of convenience? Like we needed something to happen for White Tiger to get involved with crooked cops? Or are you
mm,
actually going to explain like what was the operation? Because it's kind
mm,
of weird to have some unanswered threads that are super involved with your A story. Not like an insignificant thing, what Nikki was doing. It was pretty significant to the point where he starts lying about what he was doing. So when someone starts lying, I want to know what was the truth. Besides, he was
mm.
there. I want to know why he was there. Was he ambushed? Did he was it a scheduled meeting? What were the cops? Why were they attacking him? Like, what the heck was the purpose? In fact, I remember in season two where there's a similar circumstance and they start talking. I think Reyes wants Matt off the case because Matt was defending Grotto earlier, who the Punisher killed. And there was no traces of the witness protection agreement between the DA Reyes and Grotto. Like she just destroyed all evidence to kind of cover herself up because Grotto gets killed by the Punisher. And Matt says, we have evidence on our side. We have documentation that says that we were working with Grotto and we were trying to negotiate with you. The fact you don't have evidence, that's kind of weird. It's kind of like suspicious on your end. So you can't kick us off this conflict of interest case. We're going to defend the Punisher. So you saw like some conflict and some resolution, and the story was still not over yet. It was not like that ended the episode, right? I kind of just want more of that in this episode. I want to see some more conflict. I want to see some more resolution, some more back and forth. I thought things gotten wrapped up. really fast in this episode, and I was expecting much, much more.
Mm. I think one of my major overarching issues with just this episode, or maybe the story as a whole, but specifically this episode, is that the story, to me, it feels like the story rushes to the payoffs without doing the proper setup. For example, these are the questions that I had. How did the cops know where the informant was hiding? How did they chase him in the cab? No, how did they get him, the informant, in the cab during the chase scene? Like we don't really we see him going into the van, and then the next time we see him, he's in the cab, and they tricked the police. How'd that happen? Then who's the Asian guy that put him in the cab? I had to go to the credits to find his name. His name is Forrest Tam, and this is the first episode he appears in. And Matt calls him Buddy. Who is this guy? Where was he in the previous episodes? What's the relationship? Well, and then another question I had is why did the informant lie? In the story, the characters theorize. They say maybe the cops got to him, or they threatened his kid, or he was never on our side in the first place. And I feel like if there was like a monologue of him actually saying why he lied, maybe like, oh, they threatened my kid, that would have been a lot more. That would have been a better payoff. It would have been more emotional than him just lying on the stand and then the heroes having to guess why he lied. I wasn't a fan of that. And then finally, as you said, why were the cops beating that guy up when Hector intervened? It feels like there are a lot of payoffs without the proper setup, and it feels like the story is poorly planned, and they're just rushing to get to the end.
Yeah, I mean, I actually disagree a little bit about the motives for Nikki lying. To me, I read it as like he's afraid of the police, of their retaliation if he does testify against Powell and Shanahan in open court. To me, I got that read, and I got the read that basically one of the cops killing Hector at the end kind of confirms this was the fear he had when he decides to lie. But still, I do agree when was it like Tam, the associate of Matt?
Yeah, Tam.
I have I don't know if I don't remember him or if he was never in an episode before this. He just kind of like appears so that they can avoid Powell, so Cherry can kind of duck Powell. And that was just like I don't know. I understood what they were trying to do. They're trying to like maintain tension. Like, oh my gosh, is Powell going to intercept Nikki before he comes to court? Which I somewhat enjoyed because it reminded me of like Nadeem taking Matt or Matt taking Nadeem to the courthouse at the end of season 3 to testify against Fisk, right, in open court. And that was done better. There was more conflict. It was more drawn out. It was more interesting. But I think the failure on this side to do a very similar like plot beat is just like you said, it was ultimately just an editing trick. We saw Nikki go to Cherry's van, and then Nikki
Yeah.
comes out of a taxi with Tam, who was barely in the show before this episode started, if at all. It was just like you didn't really write something clever here. You just kind of edited around so we can infer at some point Cherry dropped him off in front of a taxi. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not that interesting, but
See, the reason I saw a problem with Nikki is that if he wasn't going to testify because he was so afraid of the cops, then why did he stay in the safe house with the good guys? Why couldn't he just tell the cops that, oh, I'm not going to testify? It feels, hmm, here's how can I say this? He stayed with him staying with Daredevil or staying with Cherry implied that he was willing to testify against the cops. But then when he gets to court, he doesn't testify. So what was the point of him staying in the safe house? How did him, if he was going to be in danger before he stayed in the safe house, then how would testifying change his situation? Wasn't he already in danger to begin with? Was not testifying going to make the cops back off of him?
I mean, who really knows? You could argue that Nikki lost his nerve. He was going to testify, and then he saw like 50 police officers like in the courtroom. He's like, you know what? Never mind. You could argue that. You could argue that like he lost his nerve, or that he didn't realize like like you think or do something, and then you're confronted with the realities of what's going to happen, and you're like, you know what? Never mind. Like it could just be that simple. I don't know.
I agree with you, but I think just a simple dialogue scene of them confirming that instead of them relying on us to come up with the answer would have been stronger.
I mean, there are a lot of things that could have been stronger about the episode.
What else do you have in your notes?
Yeah, I think that the next biggest thing about this episode is probably Hector beating the charges, right? And
Hmm.
then this infuriates Fisk. He's like, you know what? I'm going to double down on my anti-vigilante efforts. And he
Hmm.
calls BB Urich um, for an interview, and he's like, "I'm going to tell you, like, basically that I don't stand for vigilantism in my city." And as he's telling this to BB Urich, someone in a Punisher outfit, presumably a crooked cop, just like Powell, just like Shanahan, executes the White Tiger. And
Mm,
I don't know. I thought it was an interesting. I just wonder, like, did we speed rush through the trial? Because if it genuinely felt like a by multi, I don't mean two. I mean like three, if not four episode arc. Did we speed rush through what should have been a 3 to 4 episode arc because you wanted to kill the White Tiger to kind of like raise the stakes? Like, are you trying? Is like, are we pacing a bigger story here instead of this arc? I remember like an old leak from like multiple years ago, right? Which said that Daredevil Born Again is paced like it's Andor. And as I recall, Andor is about like several 3 to 4 episode arcs, right?
yeah.
And they're actually the arcs do like lead into each other, but they're relatively self-contained. There's a
Hmm.
heist, there's a prison arc, there's like the post-prison, the rebellion stuff. Like sure, there's continuity that leads into each other, but the arcs in themselves are very self-contained. So I wonder, like, this doesn't feel like it was paced for like a mini arc like Andor was. Like Andor really did pace their arcs like a full complete story. It never really felt rushed, right? Hit all the story beats, answered basically all the questions you could want to answer, and then it started a new arc right afterward. This one
Hmm.
did not feel like we answered all the questions we wanted to have. It just felt like maybe we're speed rushing to kill the White Tiger because this is really important for the next arc. Tiger dies and something's going to happen now. And that's why I kind of am theorizing like maybe we just really want to get to the Tiger death because it's going to kickstart something new.
Hmm. Do you remember what episode they said Daredevil suited up in the original leagues?
No, I wanted to say it was like 4 to 5 maybe.
Hmm. One other critique I had is that I wasn't a fan of the B plot with Kingpin's gang war because it felt too irrelevant to the episode. And I know like stories can build up to other things, but I would have been more interested in seeing a B plot that expands on the ideas that are actually relevant to the episode. For example, the police knowing that Matt can now fight, or the Punisher mystery. What are these Punisher wannabes actually doing? Those two things were ideas that were in the last episode and would have been relevant to this episode and could have been a B plot. But instead, they focused on Kingpin's gang war, and that didn't really add much to the episode, if at all. And I was not a fan of that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree completely. For some reason, I had noticed that the Kingpin scenes in this season really have not been working for me whatsoever. And I think it's because what you just said, where they have such little to do with the A story, which is Matt's, like either the White Tiger arc or the Bullseye arc from, well, so it's a scene basically, like the two scenes of Bullseye in episode one. Like the Kingpin stuff has no overlap whatsoever with the Bullseye stuff, hardly any overlap with the White Tiger thing, right? And it's not really paced in a way where it's like maybe Fisk does have involvement with these like corrupt cops, the Punisher stuff. Like there's really no thread to pull on to make us think that he does. As far as I'm concerned, it just seems like
Except the last episode. I mean, the
he
last
doesn't like
scene.
vigilantes. Yeah, that's true. Actually, yeah, that's true. He it does seem like now he is like pulling the strings of the cops, but that doesn't really so that explains why his monologue at the end of BB Urich was actually a good scene, but the scenes with him and Vanessa about this gang war, about like these like hijackings with the gangs inside the gangs, what's going on at that one part of the city where all this is happening, like Kingpin or Vanessa sending her fixer to negotiate settlements. I'm just like, it's not working for me. Like the B plots are not like weaving seamlessly to the A story. In fact, it's like very discreet.
There was one good scene related to the B plot, and that was the Bruce Knuckle transition, where it went from Kingpin's Bruce Knuckles and then it cut to Matt's Bruce Knuckles. And I guess, I mean, the symbolism there, like it's showing parallel mirroring, but that's about it. I still don't know why his knuckles are bruised. I hope that becomes a relevant plot point because that's the third time they've shown it this season, I believe.
It's at least the second time. It definitely at least the second, if not third time. And it's interesting. And I hope it goes somewhere. But sometimes they just will open up a thread and I can't tell if they're gonna follow it up. Like the
Mm.
Punisher, like what were these Punisher cops doing with Nikki? Like, are they gonna pay that off? Or is it just like it's not that important? We just needed to think we need the action, the result to happen from the action. We're not gonna explain what the action, why it started. Um,
Mm.
and I almost feel like who the Kingpin is beating up is not really going to be. even if it's mentioned, I don't know if it's gonna be a major plot point.
Mm.
Like the best attempt I can see of the A and B stories like merging seems to be that Fisk and Vanessa have couples therapy with Heather, who is dating Matt. That seems to be the common thread, but I don't know. These scenes are kind of taking a long time, especially when I don't see what they do to complement each other.
Mm.
We have
I
like
agree.
an alleged cheating scandal with like Adam and Vanessa, presumably maybe when the Kingpin was shot by Echo and he was hurt, and Vanessa was doing her own Kingpin's business and she found someone else named Adam. It's just like, what does this got to do with like Matt's story, the White Tiger, like Bullseye? Where is this really? Where's the connective tissue? That's what I
Mhm.
think these scenes kind of like distract from the larger story. It does not feel like it builds on a larger story. It seems that it detracts from a larger story.
Yeah, I agree. So after Hector gets acquitted, then he gets shot by a Punisher wannabe. And one thing that I noticed is that there was something that we were talking about before. It was called, I called it lesson not learned. And it's basically where a character warns another character not to make this certain mistake. And then that character makes that mistake and is punished for it. And that's what happened here. Because towards the middle of the story, he says, Matt tells Hector, you know, if you get acquitted, your White Tiger days are over. And then at the end of this episode, Hector puts on the he gets acquitted, but he puts on the White Tiger suit again. And then he gets killed. And I thought that was a interesting writing technique. And obviously, this is gonna rope in the Punisher, and hopefully he appears next episode. And it'll be interesting to see how he deals with the chaos that he's created indirectly due to his vigilante days. And then, finally, let's talk about the legal drama. What do you think about it? Are there any further notes
I
that you
feel
have on
like,
it?
yeah, generally speaking, I think legal dramas are one of the harder genres to articulate, and that's because you really can't BS writing a legal drama. Like there are so many nuances in court in American law. Um, that's why they're paid the big bucks, right? You cannot fake simulating a court drama realistically if you do not know, like if you have not researched extensively what courts are like. Um, you really need to capture the nuances of court to make it feel real. And this show, or at least this episode, did not feel like it captured like all the nuances of court. It was pretty, it was pretty straight, honestly. Like there's Nikki lying, and then it's Matt exposing Hector, and then there's a not guilty verdict.
Hmm.
Pretty uncomplicated thread of events for what should have been, I don't want to say complicated, but more complex storytelling. Like the court system is it's very difficult to kind of navigate through. So if you're trying to do a legal drama, you need to really capture all the things that make the court unique and interesting while weaving that in an interesting story about whatever your story is about. And in this case, I don't think we captured the complex nuances of the court system, which
Hmm.
is why I said like it's really a blunt answer. Matt exposing White Tiger is Hector, or Hector is the White
Hmm.
Tiger, as his kind of defense. It was a very, like I said, the courts are very complex. They're very nuanced, and
Hmm.
that was a very uncomplex, unnuanced way to resolve the tension of how Hector is going to be found not guilty.
Hmm.
So I really feel like it stems from a larger issue where the White Tiger arc should have been at least one more episode, and then you
Would you
could
say that
capture
this
you
felt,
have more opportunities for more nuance.
would you say that this felt like someone, it could be written by someone who doesn't even have a law degree?
Yeah, it didn't feel like this person has taken the time to observe courts. It did not feel like this guy has interviewed a lawyer or somebody or someone who has expertise in court procedure or clever things that happen in real life that could be appropriate for the show. You could just do a little tweak. I didn't feel like there's anything here where it's like this guy knows what he was doing.
Hmm.
Like, which is interesting because like in the White Tiger comic arc, it's resolved in a completely different way. It's not really important, but it's just it felt more real than this. This did not feel like someone really did their due diligence to capture the essence of the court because, like I said, the court system is very complex. It's very nuanced. You need very specific ways of you need specific details of the way the court operates to make your story feel real. And there was nothing here that felt very specific to the court system. It was very generalized. A little bit back and forth, and then a resolution, there's a verdict. There was not any kind of clever, kitschy legalese or anything, legal strategy where I could say, okay, this is these writers did their due diligence. I did not feel like they did anything, any research to prepare for writing this arc. And this is this spins off into another thing, which is like the use of supporting cast. I feel like the use of the supporting cast has been pretty weak in the first few episodes. Cherry obviously was used as a misdirection to get Nikki to the courthouse. That's, I
Hmm.
think, one of the only few things he did this episode. McDuffie has been hyped up as this like super, super lawyer, right? Like Foggy was like kind of
Wait,
up
wait, wait.
talking
By
her.
who?
Karen was up talking her.
Really? I
Foggy,
remember that.
Karen, Matt. Matt and Karen
Hmm.
go back and forth about how Foggy's like super outmatched. Like they cannot compete. Like he cannot compete with McDuffie, right? In Josie's
I thought I
bar
was talking
before
about
he's killed.
attractiveness.
Maybe. I definitely feel like it was more like an intellectual thing because
Hmm.
she roasts him about like how he left a very high law firm in order to go into like working for like a poultry place or something. I thought I was expecting like incredible legalese from McDuffie, because that's like what happened with Foggy in season two. There are stretches where Matt was just playing around with Elektra, and Foggy had to carry the Frank arc all by
Yeah,
himself,
yeah, he did.
where
Yeah.
he was being clever, Karen was doing research, like they were doing their due diligence, the writers were, in articulating court specific nuances and legal strategies on how to kind of overcome tasks. I did not see any legal strategies from McDuffie. I barely saw anything from Matt outside just telling the truth and then telling the truth again. I didn't feel like they really dug deep in order to do this. Like I told you in season two, Matt and Foggy and maybe Karen, I don't quite remember. They had found an alternative to PTSD where Frank was satisfied with to use as his legal defense. Like they had to do lots of research. They had to kind of dig deep and use a legal, specific, nuanced approach to answering this question: how to overcome, how to defend Frank when Frank doesn't really believe he has PTSD. And then they do, and they almost win up until Frank decides to throw the case. And Foggy
Matt.
hard
Wait,
carried that
Matt or
case as
Frank?
well.
No, no, Frank did. Yeah, my
What do you
bad.
mean?
I thought
Yeah.
Matt was throwing the case because he was messing around with Electra, but then Frank did say that he loved killing every single one of them, and that's when he threw the case.
Yeah. But Foggy, like I think Marcy or someone remarks like you were going to win that an unwinnable case. You were about to win it until Frank just lost his head, right? And Frank lost his head on purpose. It was not because like he really had a psychic break or a mental break, right? He threw it
Hmm.
on purpose. Like Foggy was going to win the case. Like we all now know Foggy is really him. Can we say that about McDuffie? Is she really her? Like what has she brought to the table? Like legal strategies. And admittedly, Matt hasn't done a lot either, but like where's the clever digging deep with the legal specific nuances to kind of come up with an answer from an unanswerable position? You come up with an answer. I don't feel like we're there yet, and I don't think Duffy's done that. I think Matt has really not done that either to a satisfying level. Yeah,
Hmm.
I just think in general, like Matt's supporting cast has been quite weak. Cherry has done a little bit, but nothing extensively where I'm like, oh my gosh, Cherry is doing something very clever. Where only Cherry could have done that. Like only Cherry could have driven that van like that in a way where Tam could just like really take Foggy to the cab. Like I don't know. I don't see any specifically interesting or clever things these supporting cast are doing. And I think that's kind of disappointing because the original Daredevil, Karen was very well developed. Nadine was super well developed. Foggy was well developed. Like all your B cast were just as interesting, if not more interesting than your A cast in some points. Right now, there's no really well developed, well defined B cast members yet. Even Heather, not that well developed.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully that changes as the story goes on.
Yeah. I will
Although
add
those,
one thing though.
yeah,
Um, I think that what I wanted to see more from this episode as well was deepening the promise from the ending of episode two, which is Matt losing his head a little bit, fighting back against the cops, against Powell in particular. And we see this one scene where Powell confronts Matt and implies he knows he's a fighter or he's got powers or something. And that
yeah,
thread is
yeah.
just like not really developed as the episode goes on at all. It's almost like a non-point that Powell made the discovery, you'd think this has like deeper implications. And Matt does say like, I don't think you can prove like Powell says I can report you. And Matt, I don't remember what he says, but to the point where he's like, I don't think you can prove it, or you would have to prove that you were trying to kill Nikki in order to prove that I fought back. So there's a bit of a stalemate, but I just wish like that was an interesting thread. It was really
Mhm.
interesting, and then it just died off like almost immediately. I wish that we really tried to pursue that a little bit harder.
I agree. Instead of spending time on the gang war. Is that all
Yeah,
the notes you have?
yeah. I'll just add really quickly. I hope that the gang war matters significantly in wherever we go. If we go with Muse, if we go with the fake Punishers, I don't know the direction of the story, but I really hope that gang war really informs and deepens the other plot, so then all the A, B, C stories can kind of finally emerge. Because right now, getting to that point where they merge has been really difficult. I want to see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right. That'll do it. Well, folks, that's all from us today. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you next time on the podcast.